The first thing people assume about Ron Howard is that he was born smiling, that his childhood was a smooth slide from one set to another, from one laugh to the next, always under bright lights and soft applause. But the truth is, Ron's earliest memories weren't of joy. They were of pressure, of being watched, of being evaluated not as a boy but as a product. There's a moment, hidden in the quiet corners of his childhood, where the camera wasn't the enemy, but the thing he couldn't quite understand. He knew it was important, but he didn't know why. He was 5 years old, and the world around him was already asking him to perform something he didn't yet know how to feel. Ron grew up in a house that felt like a set. His father, Rance, was always working, writing, acting, directing, while his mother, Jean, held the household together like a director holding a chaotic scene. To a child, that might sound like magic, but for Ron, it was a constant reminder that life was never private. Even at home, even in the simplest moments, he was being shaped for an audience. His parents loved him, yes, but love in their world came with a condition: don't disappoint. That wasn't cruelty. It was survival. It was how you survived in Hollywood. And young Ron, with his clean-cut face and bright eyes, became a symbol of that survival. The Andy Griffith Show didn't just cast Ron Howard. It captured him. It took him from a child actor with potential and turned him into Opie, a character who would live inside the American imagination for decades. But there was a hidden cost to that kind of fame. Ron wasn't just playing a role, he was becoming it. The lines between the boy and the character began to blur. On set, Ron was always polite, always bright, always good. But off camera, he was often quiet, uncertain, and deeply aware of how much everyone depended on him to be perfect. He learned early that his emotions were not his own. They belonged to the show. Behind the cheerful porch swings and the gentle, nostalgic humor, there was a world of tension. Not the kind you see in dramatic films, no shouting, no explosions, just quiet, constant friction like a rope slowly fraying. Ron was small in that world. He wasn't the leader. He wasn't the star. But he was the one who had to adapt to the personalities around him. And there was one cast member who didn't just challenge him, she unsettled him. Not because she was cruel, but because she was unpredictable. She didn't play the game the way everyone else did, and that made her dangerous in the eyes of a child trying to survive. Ron was a boy who could read a room before he could read a book. He learned that people didn't always mean what they said. He learned that a smile could hide resentment. He learned that adults had wounds they didn't know how to heal. And he learned that sometimes the hardest part of being a kid on set wasn't the acting. It was understanding the adult world around him. There were moments when he would watch the adults, and he could feel the tension in their silence. He could sense the unspoken arguments, the grudges. The grudges that lasted years, even after the cameras stopped rolling. Frances Bavier, the woman who played Aunt Bee, was one of those adults. To the audience, she was warmth itself. But to Ron, she was something else, an unpredictable presence, a force of nature with a private, rigid inner world. The crew whispered about her. They spoke of her as if she were a storm you could feel coming, even if you couldn't see the lightning. Ron wasn't afraid of her. He was wary. And in a world where he had to be brave all the time, wariness felt like a form of protection. What made Ron's relationship with her so complicated wasn't her personality. It was his inability to understand it. She didn't smile easily. She didn't play the game of friendliness that everyone else seemed to understand. She kept her distance. She had boundaries that felt like walls. And to a child who was already learning that life was about pleasing others, her refusal to perform kindness felt like rejection. Ron didn't hate her. He couldn't, but he didn't trust her. And that distrust stayed with him long after the show ended. But the tension wasn't just between Ron and Frances. It was between Frances and Andy Griffith, between the heart of the show and the person who held it together. Andy was the calm center, the steady force. He was the one who made everyone feel safe, even when the world was chaotic. But his relationship with Frances was strained, and the strain was not a single event. It was a slow erosion, a growing distance, a misunderstanding that never fully healed. Andy tried to bridge it. He tried to be gentle, to be patient, to show her that he cared. But she valued privacy above all else. And in her world, the act of reaching out felt like an intrusion. There's a scene in Ron's life that no one talks about, the moment he realized that the adults he admired were flawed. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation. It was a quiet, almost invisible moment when he saw Andy's face after another failed attempt to connect with Frances. Andy looked tired, not physically, but emotionally, like a man who had been trying to fix something that might never be fixable. Ron watched that, and something inside him shifted. He began to understand that even the people who seemed strongest had wounds, that even the ones who made you feel safe could be broken inside. Ron's childhood was full of moments like that, moments where he was forced to grow up too fast. He wasn't allowed to be a normal kid. He was expected to understand adult pain, adult conflict, adult responsibility. He carried it like a secret, like a burden he didn't know how to speak about. When the show ended, it didn't feel like freedom. It felt like leaving a family that had raised him. He had been part of something bigger than himself for so long that the idea of being just Ron Howard was unfamiliar, almost frightening. After Mayberry, Ron tried to find his place. He appeared on Happy Days, a role that seemed to continue the pattern of being the good boy. But this time, something inside him had changed. He wasn't content to be a symbol anymore. He wanted to create. He wanted to control the story instead of being controlled by it. That desire didn't come from arrogance. It came from a deep need to reclaim his life, to decide what he would become. It was a quiet rebellion. Not against his parents, not against the industry, but against the idea that he would always be defined by someone else's script. Ron's first steps into directing were not glamorous. They were messy. They were uncertain. He didn't have the confidence that the world assumed he had. He had the opposite. He was terrified. He was afraid he would fail. He was afraid that he would be exposed as a child who had only ever been good at following directions. But something else was driving him too, an almost desperate need to prove that he could be more than a face. He wanted to be seen as a person who could build worlds, not just exist inside them. And then came the moment that changed everything. The first time he realized he could make people feel something. Not just laugh, not just watch, but feel. That realization didn't come from a blockbuster. It came from a small project, a film where the stakes were quiet, where the emotions were subtle, where the camera wasn't trying to show off. Ron felt something shift inside him. He realized that his childhood had given him a gift. He knew what it meant to be watched, to be shaped, to be misunderstood. And now he could use that knowledge to shape stories that felt human. But success didn't erase the old wounds. It didn't erase the sense that he was still being watched. Even as he became one of Hollywood's most respected directors, he still carried the boy who had to be perfect. He still carried the feeling that his worth depended on other people's approval. And that's the quiet tragedy of Ron Howard's story. He became powerful, and yet he never fully escaped the emotional prison of his childhood. Fame didn't free him. It simply gave him a larger stage. There were nights, long after the cameras stopped, when Ron would lie awake and think about those early years. He would remember the quiet tension, the unspoken arguments, the sense that he was always the one who had to hold everything together. He would think about Frances Bavier and the way she refused to be softened. He would think about Andy Griffith and the way he tried to fix what couldn't be fixed. And he would realize something that most people never do. That behind every smiling face, there is a story of struggle. Ron's marriage to Cheryl became his anchor. It wasn't a fairy tale. It wasn't a romance that Hollywood could sell. It was something quieter, more difficult, and more real. They built their relationship not on grand gestures, but on small moments, on the daily work of being present, on the choice to stay even when it was hard. And in that choice, Ron found something he had never experienced on set, a love that didn't demand performance, a love that didn't require him to be perfect. Even as his career soared, Ron remained deeply aware of what he had been through. He never forgot the boy who couldn't smile unless someone told him to. He never forgot the fear of being judged. He never forgot the sense of being a character instead of a person. That awareness shaped the stories he chose to tell. He didn't just make films for entertainment. He made films to explore what it meant to be human, flawed, frightened, and still brave enough to keep going. There's a quiet power in that. A child actor who becomes a director and uses his own pain to create art. A man who learned early that people can hide behind kindness, and that kindness can sometimes be the most dangerous disguise. A man who watched adults struggle with their own wounds and realized that the real drama isn't in the spotlight, it's in the spaces between scenes. In the quiet moments when no one is watching. In the moments where the truth reveals itself. Ron Howard's story isn't just about Hollywood. It's about what happens when a child is asked to grow up too fast. It's about the cost of being a symbol. It's about the long shadow that fame can cast on a person's soul. But it's also about resilience, about the ability to take the pain of the past and turn it into something meaningful. Ron didn't become a director to escape his childhood. He became a director to understand it, to give it shape, to turn it into a story that could help others feel less alone. And maybe that's the real miracle. Not that he became famous, not that he won awards, but that he survived. That he took the boy who was watched and molded and controlled, and he became a man who could watch, mold, and control the story without losing his humanity. In the end, Ron Howard's life is a reminder that behind every smile, there is a story. And sometimes, the most powerful stories are the ones that were born from the quietest struggles.